Hey, Joe. I love that freaking saying that. That reminds me of one of my favorite Jimi Hendrix tunes. And of course, you're the player who has Mr. Hendrix hovering over you. And so that has always made me understand that you're on the right side of things. Brother, I have been trying to get a hold of you for a long time. And the reason I'm doing it and the reason I look like such a fool right now is because, dude, you're in such the right place on so many things, but you're in such the wrong place on others. As I soak in all of this information this morning that seems to come at us left and right, it's clear what's going on, dude, and you need to be aware of this. I hope you can spend just 5 minutes, whatever the fuck it is, to pay attention to what I'm trying to tell you. Um, they're going after you because you're not a legitimate news organization, right? But we all know that there's fake news out there, and we all know that the people that are being extremely critical of you, especially those from CNN, are a joke. But the likes of Rachel Maddow, who just got a $30 million payday to be able to run into the next podcast and however they're going to play that out, is literally the Democratic spokesperson for the Wall Street meritocracy. And they're pulling a fucking railroad job on everybody, and they have been forever. I know you're pals with Matt Taibbi. Taibbi's a stud. He was a huge influence on me, my man. But Taibbi is in a strange place too, and I don't know why exactly. I've got a speculation that somebody had some dirt on him from his days of doing heroin in Moscow, and I think they're playing that card. And who's they? Well, listen, as every day reveals another aspect of this, the Federal Reserve is just fueling a massive criminal enterprise, brother. There's this guy who was on Crystal and Saga a couple of days ago, or Crystal and Kyle, I should say, who's a journalist who talks about the Federal Reserve. He doesn't know the whole story. I know the whole story. What they're doing is they're fueling a Ponzi scheme, and they have been since 2009. And it's gone on overdrive in a fundamental, insane way since 2019. I mean, I shouldn't say it's been on overdrive. I mean, let's compare and contrast what I'm really talking about here. Joe, the Federal Reserve spent $29 trillion to backstop what I put 13 years of my life into, and I crisscrossed this country a gazillion times to get the most insane truth of our lifetimes. You and I are about the same age. I can promise you that all of your instincts are pretty spot on. But a lot of the times you're talking to the wrong people, particularly when they get off in Alex Jonesville. The way that these cons work, especially from the suits that work inside, the most venerated financial institutions, have insane power, and they're diabolically clever. And they work a scheme that is casinos infinitum. In fact, I want to make you aware that I have on camera the guy who was the former general counsel for a woman by the name of Brooksley Bourne back in 1999, when these guys, through what was called the Commodity Futures Trading Organization, did an investigation where they found out that we had, I think it was 1998, there was $13 trillion in derivatives action. By the time we got to the 2008 great financial crisis, there was 600 to 800 trillion. And then now I think it's like 1.4 quadrillion, if you can even try to wrap your head around that number. And ultimately what they're doing is they're just fueling bets on top of bets on top of bets on top of bets that are based on a fictional enterprise. So in the case of the 2008 great financial crisis, Joe, these were liar loans that were built on appraisal fraud, that were built on lending fraud, that were built on underwriting fraud, that were built on a whole host of credit rating agency fraud, that were built on then ultimately everybody on the inside who knew about this, the whistleblowers that tried to stop it ended up getting purged. They got kicked to the curb. And then ultimately they went to the people that are supposed to actually investigate this stuff and hold it to account. We've got agencies like, the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and AGs across the country. And they basically, the system of the revolving door, the mechanics of, the white shoe law firms and the lobbyists, they literally got rid of investigations starting in about 1998. This coincided with getting rid of all of these laws like Glass-Steagall, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, that enabled all of this shit to manifest. And so they all knew what they were doing. Who's they? We're talking about former Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Rubin, who was before that the CEO of Goldman Sachs. and then he was involved with Fannie Mae and everything else to change the laws under the Clinton. Bush was already on the way to do that, first Bush, and then Clinton basically put the nail in the coffin of just a system that made sense. And then ultimately, once we got into dummy Bush, you can imagine all of the people who spent, for Bush's campaign, all the top dogs in the military-industrial complex, finance, fossil fuel, and so forth. And so they created this rigged game where they would sell, some asshole like Bush to the American people and everything that happened during that time period. But ultimately, behind the scenes, they were getting rid of regulation, the law, to be able to hold this stuff to account. And then the revolving door just simply choked the DOJ and the FBI the ability to be able to do that. In the conjo, we've got the former director of investigations of the FBI, a guy by the name of Chris Wecker. He was a Republican. This guy is a fucking badass. He was like this, former quarterback. I think it was at North Carolina State. Just an absolute stud. I don't care what his political ideology is. You need to be aware of this. This cat literally came out of Miami. Then he was in Houston, Texas, in the FBI as he worked his way up the system. He ended up busting La Costa Nostra, man. This guy was the guy, the point person for the United States that blew up all sorts of drug scenarios with, international money laundering and the cartels and all this stuff back in the 80s and the 90s, which pushed him up to number 3 at the FBI. And all of a sudden, this guy puts his head around what was then, in 2004, this giant Ponzi scheme in a housing market that was based on predatory loans. The predatory loans would find the dumbest amongst us, those who actually are vulnerable because they don't have a lot of education, particularly those in the African American community that had equity in their houses after several generations of what they had, in the mass migration, the great migration from the South to the industrial Midwest, where these folks worked their hands to the bone to be able to provide for their families. And ultimately, they got equity in their houses. The men would pass on, like in the 70s and the 80s. By the time we get to the 90s, these women are living on a fixed income. They need extra money and everything else. And people would show up at their front door and they would say, look, it's like manna from heaven. I got a fucking way to make you money right now based on the house that you actually own. It was a setup to steal their houses because these guys were all making fees. Who? The brokers, the lenders, the appraisers. Everybody was in on it. And there was an even worse aspect of it called the straw buying, where you can literally have criminals who would have some sort of conspirator inside a bank that could make up documentation fabrication based on getting the records and the warranties down at City Hall based on who actually had equity in their house. They'd made up paperwork. They had somebody on the inside that did loans. They got the loan for the house, and they made away with it. While people like somebody we feature in the con, a 91-year-old African-American woman who was literally unaware of anything, is getting booted out of her house, and she ended up shooting herself in the chest 5 times. That's important because, and I mentioned this in this other video that I sent to you, and I don't know if you'll ever have a chance to watch it, but Donald Trump actually sued, if this is insane, Deutsche Bank in 2012 for being a victim of predatory lending. There were millions of people that were victims of predatory loans. Donald Trump wasn't one of them. He was actually giving out predatory loans to both at Trump University as well as, of course, Trump mortgages. So at that time period, this guy got aware of, I don't have actual evidence, it's anecdotal, and I just kind of see how the way that Trump plays his cards. But man, there was massive documentation fraud in getting people approved for loans. It led into what was known as liar loans. That's a whole nother mess, and I could explain that later if you give me a chance to talk to you. But ultimately, these loans made a lot of people money except for the people who had their houses stolen. And that's ultimately what happened. So in the end, when the whole thing came fucking crashing down, I was talking about Trump, and I'm going all over the place too fast because I'm just whipping this up on a spur of a moment to try to get your fucking attention, Joe. The bottom line is that Trump was, in his organization, was lying, stealing, and deceiving on documentation fraud to get people approved on loans because he was the middle guy, and it was all going through his system. Now, this is on top of his money laundering and everything that he does with appraisal fraud, what we call control fraud, which CEOs do at all these major banks, is where this whole thing started. The CEOs at Wall Street's biggest banks pulled this fucking thing off because what we're talking about is that the great financial crisis was the third act of what started in the 80s and the 90s called the savings and loan crisis that then went into Enron and WorldCom and all of those things that took place in the early 2000s. After, I should mention to you, the stuff that went down with the dot-com bubble. They're all bubbles, bro. And then there's all these accounting tricks, and there's all these ways that these guys fucking lie, steal, and deceit to be able to create bubbles so they line their own pocket as things go up. And then ultimately when it fucking crashes in the old days, because we used to have capitalism is risk reward, capitalism creative destruction, capitalism is that the best should rise to the top, not the weasels who are fucking criminals. And ultimately what they did was, because they were all in cahoots, man. We're talking Secretary of the Treasury, like I started off with Robert Rubin and his generation, because of everybody came up at the Clinton time, through the Bush time, and then of course you get John Paulson at that time, and he's from CEO of Goldman Sachs, heavily involved with this. So when the whole thing fucking blew up, they go to the Federal Reserve, and they create what they call the fucking bazooka, brother. And the bazooka was this just nonstop fucking cash for the bad guys. Think about it, Joe. We had this situation like in Oceans 11, 12, and 13, where those guys ended up, pulling one of the biggest casinos in Vegas, right? To the tune of 180 million? Joe, they got away with 29 trillion. That there's 1,000 billion and a trillion. And now you got everybody and your friends like Kyle Kaliski and Crystal, and I was on their show recently, and Russell and everybody else, asking these questions about where's the corruption, man? And the fact is they can't get their heads around it, even though I was on the show and they can't remember it because we got to keep an echo chamber and keep this thing going because, dude, everything that's been going on right now that's coming down on you through the likes of Spotify and everything else is to kind of take guys out like you who've got huge audiences and you deal with a bunch of fucking morons a lot of the time, let's face it. But the bottom line is you became the target, but you were also dangerous to the system. Meanwhile, they're trying to hold you credible for something that you've never, said you are. You're not a journalism platform, dude. You're free speech. You're just a cool guy that listens to Hendrix, smokes bongs, talks to powerful people for hours at a time. I've listened to you for years, brother. And you're a badass, but the bottom line is it's just like you get all these people, you do your thing, and I listen to you, and then it's great, and blah, blah, blah. But you don't understand the fucking con. You don't understand what took over this country and what's created the corruption and what we're all under the thumb of. Now, here's my proposal to you. Talk to me. I look like a fucking fool right now, but I'm responding to all of the shit that I'm listening to this morning in between taking care of my family and trying to live and survive. And I've got all of this information. I put it all together in a goddamn series that I couldn't get on the networks because they're all owned by the guys we expose. They're all the ones, these are the guys that just paid Rachel Maddow $30 million and paid off Barack Obama to cover up all this fucking bullshit while they get away with it. And what do they get away with it? The trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that I'm trying to tell you, backstops, criminal activity, stock buybacks, all this other shit. You talk to Taibbi, you talk to a lot of these great guys, but they don't know the fucking con, and I don't know why Taibbi doesn't know the con. It blows my fucking mind. I think he does, but at the same time, there's something weird going on there. The bottom line is I dealt with all the right guys. I dealt with William K. Black, that got 30,000 criminal referrals in the SNL crisis. He put 1,000 executives in jail, including the largest, Lincoln Continental, which is this cat. Guy's name will fucking lose me. It'll come to me in a minute. But the more important thing about Lincoln Continental was that it basically spawned Alan fucking Greenspan, the guy, the mother of all deregulation. And what is deregulation? It just lets guys, I know guys like you think, hey, get government out of the pockets of, good guys trying to make shit happen. You don't understand. There's layers and layers and layers of fucking shit. And maybe you do. And maybe you're covering it up. I don't know. And if you are, that'd be a bummer, dude. I'm glad you're successful as fuck. I've always liked you. I love the, ultimate fighting. I think you're a real deal, dude. I'm trying to connect with you. Matt, please send this along to Joe. Watch it together, guys. I'll send you the fucking con. It's got the whole story. And the reason I'm trying to get your attention desperately now, I've tried to been all over Matt for a long time. I don't have a big audience. I think we've had about 400,000 people see the con. I think we've got 10,000. I mean, whatever. You guys look at huge numbers. I think you've got last look something like 11 million viewers per episode, which is fucking huge. But Joe, you're on the right side of things, man. You're on the right side of things. I'm the only one who's got the fucking answers. I'm serious. I went on a 13-year fucking odyssey because I got buried in 2008. I got crushed and almost ended my life, but I started figuring this stuff out. I started pulling the fucking threads. And I went on this cross-country mission, which became a goddamn mission, because the answers didn't make sense. And I knew there was some fucking bullshit going on. And lo and behold, I got all the goddamn answers and then some. And it's because of what I told you at the outset or sometime fucking 5-10 minutes ago. They got rid of investigations. They got rid of the FBI, the DOJ, and the AGs and all these guys going deep dive on this stuff to be able to go find the bad guys. Now, you need to be aware of this too. Because of the work that we did, We literally found the only RICO conviction of this crime in the entire United States, dude. It's racketeering, influence, corrupt organization, practice, and statutes all day, every day. That's what Jamie Dimon, Lloyd Blankfein, all the fucking Larry Cohn, every motherfucker that's at the apex of this shit, including, fucking Larry Fink. That motherfucker, he was literally at the Resolution Trust back in the S&L crisis, before he created Aladdin, before he wound up with BlackRock. He and this other guy, Schwarzman, with Blackstone, they were pumping and dumping the fucking mortgage shit the whole time. And guess who gets placed in charge of all of this Fed activity back in 2009? Larry fucking Fink, man. We're talking about BlackRock is the guys that literally became the administrator of the Fed fucking stimulus programs. It wasn't $700 billion. It wasn't $50 billion for the home modification program that just went to fucking hyenas at the base level to steal all the shit from the American government. I mean, it's insane, dude. The racket's insane. But they got $29 trillion. I'm not talking out of my ass. I know this stuff inside and out. God damn it, Joe. Fucking please. Talk to me. Watch my shit. Understand where I'm coming from. I'm just a real dude. But the reason I say it now above all else and why I'm just fucking hitting send and fuck all, because it's all happening now, dude. The Trump shit's bullshit. The Obama shit's bullshit. The network shit's bullshit. Them coming down on you because you're all focused on everything else. And I'm sure you got a lot more real truths, buried in there than all of the kind of nut jobs that happen. I don't even know what the deal is. I lose track of the stuff that's happening in the COVID space because it's not my bag. Finance and inside job corruption is my job, and that's what rules and fuels everything. And everything else, dude, everything else is smoke and mirrors. I know you're worth $100 million plus, whatever. I think you get a fucking one. I don't even know. You're worth so much money, dude. You're unfucking touchable. Please, god damn it, fucking talk to me, man. Later.